23 entries, 6 tiers. From the collapse of the North and South Towers to the man who tried to warn us about the attack months earlier, this is a deep dive into the 9/11 iceberg. Let's start from the basics. Tier 1, North and South Towers. So, the World Trade Center. Construction started in 66, opened in 75, thanks to the Rockefeller brothers, Nelson and David. You know, the guys who probably had a floor in there anyway. The architect was Minoru Yamasaki, a Japanese guy who went with a system of steel beams for load-bearing walls, a design choice that, shall we say, didn't age well. Because those steel beams, yeah, they weren't exactly fireproof like they should have been. You know the rest. The North Tower stood for 102 minutes after being hit at 8:46 a.m. The South Tower, less than an hour after being hit at 9:02 a.m. In total, 2,977 people died. Civilians, cops, firefighters, medical personnel. Of the bodies pulled from the wreckage, only 293 were intact. That's less than 10%. Flight 11 and Flight 175. These were the weapons. American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, both Boeing 767s. Basically flying fuel tanks. Flight 11 was hijacked by Mohammed Atta, the lead terrorist. Flight 175 by Marwan al-Shehi. 5 hijackers per flight. Marwan, on Flight 175, didn't turn off the transponder, so air traffic control could track him the whole way. You'd think they'd coordinate these things better, but maybe coordination is overrated. Just ask the 5 guys busted in Jersey that afternoon. Yeah, the so-called dancing Israelis. They popped back up in Tier 6. Flight 11 hit between the 93rd and 99th floors, head-on. Flight 175 hit between the 77th and 85th, at a right-leaning tilt. 147 passengers and crew died on board, not counting the hijackers, because calling them people would be generous. Both United and American Airlines retired those flight numbers out of respect, or maybe they just didn't want the bad PR. Flight 77. This one crashed into the Pentagon. American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757. The hijackers were led by Hani Hanjour, who took control after the pilots were, disposed of. At 9:37, the plane slammed into the western side of the Pentagon. The footage is, for some odd reason, 1 frame per second, so you can barely make out the plane. You'd think that the security cameras of the Pentagon would work better than the average mobile phone camera. At least, that section had been evacuated, so no one was hurt by the collapse. But the smoke, it was toxic. Long-term exposure caused cancer, the same fate that hit countless 9/11 responders. In total, 189 people died in the crash and fires, including the 59 civilians on the plane. Lynch Radar Gap. Okay, so imagine you're an air traffic controller. It's your job to keep track of all the planes in the sky and make sure they don't crash into each other. It's a stressful job, but you're good at it. Then all hell breaks loose. On 9/11, as Flight 77 was being hijacked, the pilots did the same thing they did on Flight 11. They turned off the transponder. A transponder is like a car's license plate, but for airplanes. It sends out a signal that tells air traffic control who the plane is, where it's going, and how high it is. Without a transponder, it's much harder to track a plane. When Flight 77's transponder went dark, air traffic control was monitoring the plane from the Higbee radar site. But here's the problem. It couldn't track planes using primary radar, which bounces signals off the plane itself. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem, but on 9/11, things didn't go according to plan. When the Higbee site lost track of Flight 77, coverage switched to the Lynch Radar site. Here's where things get really interesting. The Lynch Radar site had a reputation for poor coverage, and the Indianapolis Air Route Traffic Control Center knew it. Because of this, air traffic control lost track of Flight 77's precise altitude and location for a good 10 minutes. 10 minutes. That's an eternity when you're dealing with a hijacked plane. The Lynch radar finally picked up the signal again at 9:04 a.m., but by that point, the plane had already finished its 180-degree turn back toward Washington, D.C. But if they hadn't lost track of the plane, they might have been able to spot the deviation from its course and contact military personnel in time. Something could have been done. Lives could have been saved. Speaking of blind spots, they'll come up a bit today. After the next one, we literally lose an entire 47-story office block without a plane touching it. Flight 93. Flight 93, a Boeing 757. It was supposed to take off at 8 o'clock a.m., but air traffic held it on ground until 8:42 a.m. That delay saved lives because the passengers learned about the other hijacked flights from phone calls. The passengers decided to fight back. Using a food cart as a battering ram, they tried to break down the cockpit door. In a last act of desperation, the hijackers crashed the plane into an empty field in Pennsylvania. All 44 people aboard died. The intended targets were either the Capitol building or the White House. Imagine how much worse it could have been. The collapse of WTC 7. World Trade Center 7. This one is weird. It wasn't hit by a plane. It wasn't the tallest building in the complex, but it still collapsed. WTC 7 was a 47-story skyscraper located across the street from the Twin Towers. It housed offices for the SEC, the Department of Defense, and the CIA. All that important stuff. The official explanation? Debris from the collapsing Twin Towers damaged WTC 7. The resulting fires weakened the steel structure, causing it to collapse. A progressive collapse, they called it. The first steel skyscraper to ever collapse due to fire alone. At first glance, that sounds reasonable. Except the collapse was perfectly symmetrical. It fell straight down, like a controlled demolition. You can even find videos of it. Very eerie. Experts have debated the collapse for years. Some say the fires were enough to cause the collapse. Others say there's no way, that it had to be a controlled demolition. Here's where it gets interesting. The owner of WTC 7 was Larry Silverstein. He had leased the World Trade Center complex just weeks before 9/11, and he took out an insurance policy that included terrorism coverage. In an interview, Silverstein said he spoke to the fire department on 9/11, and they decided to pull WTC 7. That term is sometimes used in demolition circles, but he later clarified he meant to pull the firefighting crew, but the damage was done. The collapse of WTC 7 fueled all sorts of conspiracy theories. Some people believe it was a deliberate act, that it was part of a larger plan to destroy evidence or profit from the attacks. The official investigation concluded that the fires caused the collapse, but many people still aren't convinced. The symmetrical collapse, the pull it comment, the insurance payout, it all adds up to something fishy. Or maybe not, who knows. Tier 2, the Able Danger Program. This one starts with a seemingly innocent military intelligence program, Able Danger. It began in 1999. Its purpose was to identify Al-Qaeda members before they attacked the US. Seemed like a good idea, right? Proactive, even. The setup? Able Danger used data mining techniques to sift through massive amounts of information. They were looking for patterns, connections, anything that could lead them to Al-Qaeda. The twist comes from when you hear what they found. According to multiple sources, including some of the program's participants, Able Danger identified Mohammed Atta and 3 other future 9/11 hijackers as early as January 2000. That's over a year and a half before the attacks. They had names, photos, and even travel itineraries. They knew these guys were linked to Al-Qaeda. So what happened? That's where the story gets muddy. The military lawyers reportedly told the Able Danger team that they couldn't share the information with the FBI. Why? Because the hijackers were US persons, or at least had visas to enter the country. Apparently, it was illegal to share intelligence on potential terrorists with law enforcement if they had a green card. Bureaucracy at its finest. The information was never acted upon. The hijackers remained free to plan and execute the 9/11 attacks. The program was shut down shortly afterward. Of course. The official explanation is that the Able Danger's team's identification of Atta was just a coincidence. They didn't have enough evidence to justify further investigation. But that doesn't explain why the information wasn't shared with the FBI. What were they so afraid of? Multiple members of Congress have investigated Able Danger. They've held hearings, interviewed witnesses. The results? Inconclusive. Some people believe the program could have prevented 9/11. Others say it was just a waste of time and resources. Osama Bin Laden. Osama Bin Laden. The name alone conjures up images of, well, depends on who you ask. Born into a wealthy Saudi family, joined the Afghan forces fighting the Soviet Union in 1979. Funny how the US indirectly funded these guys because they hated communists. He separated from the Afghan rebels and formed his own military group, later called Al-Qaeda, but he got banished from Saudi Arabia later on. And so, with nowhere else to go, he ended up back in Afghanistan, declared jihad against the US for invading Saudi Arabia and their close ties with Israel. Under bin Laden's control, Al-Qaeda carried out smaller terrorist attacks. The 1998 US Embassy bombings in East Africa killed 224 people. Initially, he denied responsibility for 9/11, but then tapes leaked in November 2001 implied he had foreknowledge of the attacks. And then, in 2004, he publicly took credit. Finally, some honesty. He claimed he was inspired by the 1982 destruction of towers in Lebanon by Israeli forces. An eye for an eye, he said. For 10 years, he hid from the public, only made appearances through eerie videotapes, ranting and blabbering about jihad and the evils of the U.S. Then, on May 2, 2011, a team of U.S. Navy SEALs raided a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. One clean headshot. No respawn, of course. And then they dumped his body in the ocean. But wait, did the raid even actually happen? Pakistan's prime minister said otherwise, right before getting assassinated. More on that in Tier 6. But first, let's talk about Bin Laden's right-hand man, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM, for those of us who can't pronounce his full name. While Osama was the poster boy, KSM was the actual architect, the brains behind the operation. It was also KSM who insisted that planes be flown into buildings. Bin Laden was eager to strike the US, yes, but he thought it would be enough to just down the planes. But KSM wanted the symbolic impact, the destruction, the chaos, the body count. In 2003, members of Pakistan's version of the CIA, known as ISI, teamed up with the CIA and captured KSM, threw him to the United States. He was subjected to torture during interrogations, waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and even forced rectal rehydration. Groups like Red Cross and Human Rights Watch later called it illegal. Apparently, there are limits, even for mass murderers. Eventually, in 2007, after 4 years of imprisonment, he eventually confessed to plotting the 9/11 attacks. Whether that was clarity or exhaustion is still debated. He was formally charged with terrorism in 2008 and is currently imprisoned in the infamous Guantanamo Bay. His trial slowly continues in the court of law. Emphasis on slowly. So yeah, KSM, the mastermind behind 9/11, is still alive. Some want him executed. Others want him to rot in prison. But at this rate, he'll probably just die of old age. The jumpers. Most of the people at or above the impact site were trapped. No way out, except the windows. Some people decided they'd rather die a quick death than be slowly burned alive or suffocated from smoke. So they jumped. These weren't suicides. They were murders. Victims of a terrorist attack who were forced to make an impossible choice. To die on their own terms or to be consumed by the flames. And we just watched. You know, sometimes I think about what those people were thinking in those last few seconds. Are they regretting their life choices? Were they praying? Were they just trying to blank out the pain? I guess we'll never know. And maybe that's for the best. The Jersey Girls. Unanswered questions. 4 women from New Jersey, Kristen Brettweiser, Patty Casaza, Lori Van Aken, and Mindy Kleinberg, all lost their husbands on 9/11. They became known as the Jersey Girls. It sounds like the beginning of a heartwarming story about friendship and support, right? Well, these women weren't okay with just getting to grieve quietly. They wanted answers. They became a force, demanding an independent investigation into the attacks. Initially, the Bush administration was not particularly thrilled with the idea of a proper commission, but the Jersey Girls carried on anyway. They spoke out, they organized, they pressured Congress, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. As Senator Joseph Lieberman said, it was impossible for a member of Congress to face the family members and say they wouldn't do something. Translation: these women were so persistent, they made it politically impossible to ignore them. In late 2002, Congress finally formed the 9/11 Commission. It was a major victory for the Jersey Girls, but it wasn't the end of the story. Even after the commission released its report in 2004, the Jersey Girls weren't satisfied. They still had a lot of unanswered questions, and they weren't afraid to ask them, publicly and forcefully. They released a group statement with a series of pointed questions for many government officials. To George W. Bush, as Commander-in-Chief on the morning of 9/11, why didn't you return immediately to Washington, D.C. or the National Military Command Center once you became aware that America was under attack? To Thomas Pickard, former FBI director, please explain why the July 10, 2001 Phoenix memo, which requested a list of aviation schools to investigate for terrorists, got no farther than the FBI headquarters. These are tough questions. Questions that go to the heart of the government's response to 9/11. And questions that, to this day, still don't have satisfactory answers. Some of their questions would later be answered in the NIST report, and some would not. In 2005, the group disbanded, and the Jersey Girls went back to their normal lives. Here's where the darkness creeps in. While the Jersey Girls were praised for their activism, they were also targeted by conspiracy theorists who accused them of being government plants or part of some elaborate scheme. Yeah, they had to put up with abuse for asking why their husbands died. The Jersey Girls weren't the only ones remembered for their heroism. We'll get into another hero born from this tragedy a few entries later. Tier 3. Hani Hanjour, the unlikely pilot. Let's talk about Hani Hanjour, the guy who piloted Flight 77 into the Pentagon. At first glance, he checks all the boxes for a radical terrorist, but as we peel back the layers, the story gets weird. To put it bluntly, Hanjour was a terrible pilot. His instructors described him as a slow learner who struggled with basic flight maneuvers, taking over 5 hours to complete a 2-hour test. He just simply refused to practice critical skills like, executing stalls and landing the damn airplane. The man tasked with flying a plane into the Pentagon was literally anything but skilled. And yet somehow, Hanjour held a pilot's license before the attacks, obtained in the US in 1999. Making him somewhat of a valuable asset for any terrorist organization, to say the least. You'd think this would grant him easy access to a flying career, and yet he could not get his hands on a job. After applying to work for Saudi Air, he received a rejection. No clear reason, just a clear nope. He was pissed. He returned to Saudi Arabia again, only to get rejected again. So yeah, this raises a question or two. Why would the Saudi aviation industry turn away a trained pilot? Did they sense something unsettling about him? Or was this all part of a much bigger deceiving plan? Bummed and apparently left without options, Hanjour traveled to Afghanistan and joined Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden personally selected him as one of the 9/11 hijackers. But here's where things get even weirder. Despite his involvement with Al-Qaeda and his role in the 9/11 attacks, Hanjour's family refuses to believe he was a terrorist. They described him as meek, polite, and inwardly religious. Like, yes, he was religious, but never an extremist, or the kind who would force other people to do things his way and all. They even say he liked the United States. Not so sure about that one, though. Some people think that Bin Laden chose Hanjour simply because he was the only one with a pilot's license. He had some training, and that was enough. But this raises another question. Why didn't Al-Qaeda provide Hanjour with better training? The FBI reports describe Hanjour as fitting a pattern of young, inexperienced men who were easily manipulated and brainwashed into the Al-Qaeda network. Plus, him getting rejected by Saudi Arabia's aviation industry might have made him vulnerable to Al-Qaeda's brainwashing. Thousands of people are getting rejected from their dream jobs, but we don't see them going on a murder spree now, do we? I don't think I've done justice to how strange this gets. According to air traffic controller reports, Flight 77 performed a sharp 330-degree descending turn as it approached Washington, D.C. Something so precise that some aviation experts have questioned whether Hanjour, with his poor flight record, could have pulled it off alone. Others go further, calling him a distraction from the real operators behind the mission. But that part is still debated. The war on terror. So basically, President Bush signed a paper that said the army could go after whoever did it. Right after that, America went to Afghanistan and Iraq. And they also passed this thing called the Patriot Act, which let the government spy on people more easily. They could look at your emails, your phone calls, all sorts of stuff. All in the name of catching terrorists, of course. Lots of people thought those wars and the Patriot Act were bad ideas, but the fighting kept going. American soldiers were still in Afghanistan until 2021. That's 20 years. But what was the war on terror even supposed to be about? Getting the bad guys, stopping more attacks, making the world a better place. All good stuff, right? Wrong. Instead, it got messy. Real messy. America went to Afghanistan to get Osama Bin Laden and kick out Al-Qaeda. Sounded good, but it didn't really work. See, the Afghan people weren't too happy about being invaded. So some of them joined the very people America was trying to kick out. That made things even worse. A lot of folks were not happy at all. And that's just the start. Then came Iraq. Based on claims that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. He didn't. But getting rid of Saddam made things worse too. All kinds of bad guys showed up. Like ISIS. You know, the guys who flooded the internet with those beheading videos in the 2010s. And the people who got hurt? Oh man, so many. Hundreds of thousands died. Millions had to leave their homes. So many lives ruined. And what was it all for? That war on terror cost a ton of money. Like more money than you can even imagine. That money could have been used for schools, hospitals, and fixing roads. Instead, it went to the people who make bombs and guns. And some of those people got really, really rich. Man in the Red Bandana, Welles Crowther. A name you might not know, but should. He wasn't a politician, he wasn't a soldier. He was just a regular dude who did something extraordinary. Welles was an equities trader working in the World Trade Center. His office was on the 104th floor of the South Tower. That's pretty high up. After the plane hit the South Tower, Welles managed to get past the impact site. He could have escaped, saved himself, but he didn't. Instead, he went back up. He started helping people who were lost and injured. He directed them to the only working stairwell. He could navigate through the chaos like a champ, thanks to his training as a volunteer firefighter. Saved a dozen people in the process. His nickname comes from his trademark red bandana. In the towers, he put it over his face as a makeshift mask, like a superhero. Sadly, Welles died when the South Tower collapsed. He was only 24 years old. Welles' family didn't know about his heroism until they read accounts from survivors. They described man in the red bandana who helped him. After his death, his family found a completed application form to become a member of the FDNY. He was named an honorary New York City firefighter by Fire Commissioner Nicholas Scappetta in 2006. He finally fulfilled one of his lifelong dreams only after his death. And to think Crowther would have achieved his dream had people listened to Shah Massoud, the man who warned us, but we didn't listen. More on him later. But first, let's get to the lucky few who weren't met with devastating ends on this fateful day. Celebrities cheated death. A handful of celebs narrowly avoided death. Either they missed their flights or they never made it to the World Trade Center on time. Talk about dodging a bullet, or in this case, a plane. Mark Wahlberg and Seth MacFarlane were supposed to be on Flight 11. Mark decided to go to Toronto for a film festival instead. Seth was hungover and missed his boarding by 10 minutes. There were rumors that Michael Jackson had a meeting at the WTC that morning. He ended not making it because he overslept, talking to his mother and sister the entire night. Yeah, of course, I can't help but think about the people who weren't so lucky. The ones who didn't miss their flights. The ones who did make it to the World Trade Center on time. The ones who didn't have a celebrity's name and fame. Those ones whose stories are often forgotten. Steve Buscemi. Speaking of celebrities, there's Steve Buscemi. He's not just an actor, he's a damn hero. Steve Buscemi was in New York City on 9/11. That's not the heroic part. The heroic part is what he did next. Back in the 1980s, before he was famous, Steve Buscemi was a firefighter, part of the FDNY engine company 55 in Little Italy. So when he saw the towers fall, he didn't just stand around and gawk or take out his phone to film it all. He walked right down to the destroyed plaza and got to work. He was there for 5 days, digging through rubble and helping however he could. Steve reported suffering from PTSD due to his experience. He continues to produce and help out on various projects relating to 9/11, including the 2014 documentary, Dust, The Lingering Legacy of 9/11. He made a real impact to the firefighters who were dealing with the consequences of 9/11. Because, like I said before, that smoke was hazardous. And the rescuers inhaled it, causing long-term health problems. And now, the death toll of the rescue workers from 9/11 related health consequences is reaching the same number of deaths of firefighters from 9/11 itself. They weren't taken care of. Tier 4. Controlled demolitions. There's this belief that the two main twin towers, as well as Building 7, especially Building 7, could not have collapsed the way they did without explosive charges hidden in the building. Basically, this all started during cleanup of Ground Zero. Reports of red-hot steel beams and molten metals made some assume that the steel beams themselves had actually melted completely. The melting point of steel ranges from 2,500 to 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, while jet fuel can only burn at a range of 800 to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Theorists have a point. Jet fuel can't melt steel beams. That's not a theory, that's science. But the people who yell conspiracy when they hear about this say, jet fuel can soften up the steel. Steel loses approximately 50% of its strength at only 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. It's estimated that the temperature inside the inferno was close to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit, more than enough heat to weaken the beams. But still, there's no explanation to the question the theorists raise. How the hell did Building 7 collapse in on itself? And the fact that no loud booms were heard during the collapse, which, detonated bombs tend to make, only makes this even more strange. Ahmed Shah Massoud. Okay, so imagine you're playing a video game, right? And you know that a giant monster is about to attack the city, but nobody believes you. That's basically the story of Ahmed Shah Massoud. Ahmed Shah Massoud was a big deal in Afghanistan back in the day. He was like the Minister of Defense and the leader of this group called the United Islamic Front for the Salvation of Afghanistan. Sounds super intense, right? Basically, he was fighting against the Taliban. In April 2001, way before 9/11 even happened, Massoud went to the European Parliament and dropped a bombshell. He said that his intelligence guys had found out about plans for a huge terrorist attack in the United States. But nobody listened to him. They were all like, yeah, whatever, dude. We're busy with important stuff. Like deciding what oil company are we gonna let ruin the climate next. Fast forward to September 9, 2001, just 2 days before 9/11, Al-Qaeda assassinated Massoud. They blew him up with a bomb hidden in a video camera. Osama Bin Laden claimed he ordered the hit on Massoud to appease the Taliban because he knew that the 9/11 attacks were going to cause them some serious problems. Basically, he was trying to cover his tracks. The Taliban, of course, denied knowing anything about the assassination. They're always like, who? Us? So let's recap. We had a guy who warned us about 9/11 months in advance. Nobody listened to him. And then he got assassinated by Al-Qaeda 2 days before the attacks. Coincidence? Really? The crazy thing is, Massoud's warnings weren't the only ones that were ignored. Sybil Edmonds, a former FBI translator, also tried to warn the government about potential terrorist attacks. But she was silenced and her claims were dismissed. The government plugged its ears. The same way they plug their ears whenever they're questioned about the missing $2.3 trillion of taxpayer money that disappeared without a trace right before 9/11. More on that later though. FEMA and NIST. After the Twin Towers and Building 7 came crashing down, Congress and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, realized that there wasn't a single government agency that could investigate why buildings fall down. It's like they were all, oops, we forgot about that part. So they quickly passed a law called the National Construction Safety Team Act. Sounds super exciting, right? Basically, it said that NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was in charge of figuring out why and how the towers fell. Think of FEMA as the guys with the money. They paid for NIST to do its thing, and they also funded cleanup crews and repairs to damaged buildings. NIST, on the other hand, was like the super smart scientists. They created computer simulations, interviewed survivors, watched tons of videos, conducted fire tests in the lab, and collected pieces of steel from ground zero. In 2004, NIST published a report that basically explained everything we know about 9/11 and its aftermath. It's like the Bible of 9/11 truth, but without all the religious stuff. But not everyone was exactly happy with NIST's report. Critics said that the NIST ignored certain pieces of evidence that didn't fit their story. They also said that NIST's computer simulations were flawed and that their conclusions were based on assumptions, not facts. One of the biggest criticisms of the NIST report is that it didn't fully explain why Building 7 collapsed. Building 7 wasn't hit by a plane, but it still came down in a controlled demolition-like fashion. Some people think that this proves that the government was behind 9/11. But hey, we've already talked about this before, so I won't get into that all over again. Now, not saying NIST was lying, but the criticism hasn't exactly gone away. Here's a fun fact. NIST is also responsible for setting the standards for things like weights, measures, and computer security. So basically, they're the reason why your ruler is accurate and why your password has to be 12 characters long. But yeah, some people think that NIST did a great job and that their report is the definitive account of what happened. Others think that NIST was part of a government cover-up and that their report is full of lies and half-truths. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but it's definitely a story that's worth investigating. Tier 5, $2.3 trillion. Now let's talk about money, specifically missing money, like a lot of money. So it's September 10, 2001, just one day before things went totally bonkers. Donald Rumsfeld, who was basically the head honcho of the Pentagon, gets up in front of a crowd and drops a bombshell. He says, guys, we seem to have misplaced a teeny tiny amount of money, like $2.3 trillion. Now, for those of you who are still counting your allowance in pennies, a trillion is a buttload of money. I mean, we all lose a few bucks between couch cushions every now and then, but in this case, those bucks could buy you a small country several times over. Think of it this way. We could feed everyone on the planet and still have enough left over to buy everyone a decent used car. And college. We could pay off almost all of America's student loan debt with that kind of cash. Imagine this freedom. No more ramen noodles for dinner every night. Or, if you're not into feeding people and freeing them from debt, we could build some seriously cool stuff. We could crisscross the country with high-speed trains that actually make it worth taking the train. We could ditch fossil fuels and build a brand new, super efficient power grid. If you stack $2.3 trillion in $100 bills, it'd circle the Earth almost 90 times. Great visual, but not super comforting. Rumsfeld tried to play it cool, blaming outdated accounting systems. Translation, our spreadsheets are from the Stone Age, so chill out, bro. He even said that it was a matter of life and death, which in hindsight is kinda ironic. But then, the next day, 9/11 happened. And suddenly, a missing $2.3 trillion wasn't exactly a top priority. In the rush to start the war on terror, the Pentagon got even more money thrown at it. By the first anniversary of the attacks, some news outlets started asking questions about the missing money again. But by then, the whole thing was buried under a mountain of news about terrorism, patriotism, and overpriced war toys. To this day, nobody knows where that $2.3 trillion went. It's like it vanished into thin air. Poof, gone. Maybe aliens stole it. Maybe it's buried in Area 51. Or maybe, just maybe, someone at the Pentagon has a really sweet vacation home in the Bahamas. This is American taxpayer money, and the Pentagon should be able to explain where it went. It's not like they're running a lemonade stand. Some sources claim the Pentagon has since reconciled some of the missing money. But let's be real. Reconciled probably means they found a dusty old file cabinet and said, close enough. Not pointing fingers here, but when an agency as powerful as the Pentagon can't account for trillions of dollars, something's not right. But just you wait. The mystery plane circling DC coming up in the next year cost $223 million per unit. Guess whose pocket that came out of? Project for a New American Century. Okay, imagine. You're in a secret club with a bunch of super smart people who are obsessed with politics. They sit around all day dreaming up crazy ideas about how to run the world. That's basically what a think tank is. And there's one called the Project for a New American Century, or PNAC for short. These guys were really into the idea of America being the biggest, baddest superpower on the planet. They wanted to build up the military, flex their muscles, and basically tell everyone else how to run their countries. In 1997, some guys named Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan, not related to the actress, started PNAC because they thought the Republican Party didn't have a strong enough plan for foreign policy. They wanted to bring back the good old days of Ronald Reagan. They wanted to invade countries, win wars, and make America the boss of the whole world. A lot of the people who signed PNAC's Statement of Principles in 1997 later got jobs in the George W. Bush administration. Guys like Donald Rumsfeld, the same guy who lost the $2.3 trillion, Dick Cheney, and Jeb Bush, George W.'s younger brother, who nobody really remembers. It's like they were all part of a secret society, waiting for their chance to take over the world. In 2000, PNAC published a report called Rebuilding America's Defenses. It was basically a blueprint of how to turn America into a global empire. And here's the really creepy part. One section of the report said that America needed a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, to make people support their crazy plans. That line aged awkwardly. After 9/11, a lot of people pointed to that line as proof that the Bush administration was secretly behind the attacks. They said that PNAC was basically predicting 9/11 years in advance. That's like your friend saying your house is going to burn down, and then it does. Weird coincidence? Sure, but still weird. Some people think that the members of the Bush administration who were involved with PNAC saw 9/11 as an opportunity to push their agenda. They used the attacks to justify invading Iraq, increasing military spending, and spying on American citizens. Some other people think they were just a bunch of patriotic heroes who were just trying to protect America. Others think they were power-hungry warmongers who were willing to do anything to achieve their goals. The truth is, probably somewhere in the middle, but it's definitely a story that's worth thinking about. So yeah, PNAC wanted a new Pearl Harbor. Then 9/11 happened. Coincidence? Maybe. Creepy? Definitely. Tier 6, the mystery plane. 9/11 was already chaotic enough, to say the least. Planes crashing, buildings collapsing, and then there's this thing, a white plane, a big one, flying in circles near the White House. Multiple news reporters saw it. CNN's John King even filmed it. This plane was flying in what's normally restricted airspace. You know, where you really shouldn't be flying a plane, especially on a day like that. But nobody ever gave a straight answer about what it was doing there. The 9/11 Commission report? Nope, not a mention. CNN sources? Classified information. Shady. Some internet sleuths did some digging. They think it was an Air Force E-4B, basically a government-modified Boeing 747. It's got a stripe, an American flag, and a weird bump in the back. Apparently, that bump is a communications pod. The plane is basically a flying command center. The idea is to keep the government running even if everything on ground goes to hell, which, was kind of happening that day. So why was it circling the White House? That's the question that nobody wants to answer. Some theories suggest it was coordinating the emergency response. Others think it was doing something else entirely. No proof either way. We can't say for certain, but keep in mind, this was while United 93 was still in the air, and the Pentagon was already on fire. Something was very wrong. Was the E-4B a mobile command center? Some questions stay unanswered. Others keep people asking. Urban moving systems and the dancing Israelis. Okay, so once again, it was already one of the worst days in American history. Planes crashing, buildings falling, people dying. All that stuff you know already. And then you see a group of guys celebrating. According to the New York Times and Haaretz newspaper reports, a group of Israeli men were arrested in New Jersey on 9/11. They were seen cheering on the destruction of the World Trade Center, dancing, posing for photos. Yes, I'm talking about one of the most infamous incidents among the tinfoil people. The case of the dancing Israelis. I gotta ask, are they really cheering over something like this? The men claimed they were just tourists on a working holiday. One of them even told a cop, and I quote, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem," which is quite the statement. Inside the van, police found $4,700 in cash, a highlighted map of New York, and box cutters. Suspicious? Definitely. Criminal? Apparently not. The men supposedly worked for a moving company called Urban Moving Systems, because what's more inconspicuous than a moving van parked near a terrorist attack? Once the FBI got involved, things got weirder. At least 2 of the 5 men may have had connections to Massoud, the Israeli intelligence agency. The FBI also questioned the owner of Urban Moving Systems, Dominic Otto Sutter, before he fled back to Israel. Because that's what innocent people do, right? Flee the country after being questioned? It's almost comical how cartoonishly suspicious it all is. After a 2-month investigation, the FBI concluded that the men, while here illegally, were not connected to Massoud. All 5 were deported. Convenient. But 2 of them did have, quote, possible connections to Massoud. Emphasis on possible. This sparked a flurry of speculation about Israeli involvement in 9/11, which have never been substantiated with credible evidence. But like the fact that individuals with possible intelligence connections were seemingly celebrating the attacks is at the very least eyebrow-raising. But here's where it gets even stranger. 3 of the 5 men later appeared on an Israeli talk show. They claimed their purpose was to document the event. Document what exactly? The joy of watching thousands of people die? Since then, it has been alleged that Urban Moving Systems was actually a front operation for Massoud. So were these guys just a bunch of misguided tourists, or were they something more sinister? Did they have prior knowledge of the 9/11 attacks? But there's another explanation. The United States and Israel have a, to say the least, very close relationship with each other. But at the time, relations between Israelis and Palestinians were particularly tense. The Second Intifada was raging, and there was a deep sense of distrust and all there. Some Israeli hardliners viewed America's troubles as an opportunity to gain support for their cause. The thinking, as repulsive as it sounds, was that if America experienced a devastating attack, they would be most likely to side with Israel. The only truth here is we may never know the full story. Benazir Bhutto, Osama Bin Laden, and the theories that just won't die. Benazir Bhutto was a big shot in Pakistan. She was prime minister twice. And in Pakistan, prime ministers are more important than presidents and tend to be the face of the country. Not only that, she was also the first ever female prime minister of a Muslim country. So yeah, kind of a huge deal. In a 2007 interview with Al Jazeera, she said something really interesting. She claimed Osama Bin Laden was already dead, and even named his supposed killer, Omar Sheikh, a Pakistani extremist tied to Al-Qaeda. Think about that for a second. This woman, who was a major player in Pakistani politics, was saying that the world's most wanted terrorist was already 6 feet under. She even said that Omar Sheikh had dealings with the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. But here's where things get even crazier. A month after that interview, Bhutto was assassinated by a suicide bomber. And guess who sent the bomber? Al-Qaeda themselves. This led to a whole bunch of conspiracy theories. Some people thought that Bhutto knew too much and that Al-Qaeda wanted to silence her. Others thought that she misspoke and was actually talking about Daniel Pearl, an American journalist who was beheaded in 2002. But never mind, I don't want to be on the Al-Qaeda hit list. To make things even more confusing, the next day on CNN, Bhutto supposedly said, "I don't think General Musharraf personally knows where Osama Bin Laden is." So she contradicted herself faster than a politician promising lower taxes. But wait, there's more. There were rumors that Bin Laden had died way before the official raid in 2011. Some reports said he died of an unidentified illness as early as December 2001. There was also speculation that he was dying from kidney failure and had to lug a dialysis machine around with him in Afghanistan. A Time magazine article from 2008 claimed that the CIA gave him no more than 6 to 18 months to live because of his kidney problems. The CIA even shut down their unit focused on capturing him in 2006, saying that they didn't have any solid leads. They just threw their hands up in the air and said, he's probably dead anyway. But then, when Barack Obama became president in 2009, he made finding Bin Laden a top priority. And suddenly, new videos and audio tapes of Bin Laden started popping up. Coincidence? Probably. It's like they were trying to make it look like he was still alive, even if he wasn't. Even though Bin Laden was supposedly a huge media figure, no photos or videos of his actual death have ever been released. That photo of Obama and Hillary Clinton watching the raid, it's famous, sure. But critics have pointed out that there's no released footage to confirm what they were actually seeing. Maybe they were just watching Game of Thrones or something. Some people think that the US government faked Bin Laden's death to boost Obama's approval ratings. Others think that he was already dead and the raid was just a cover-up.